Hello, and a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Anna, and I am passionate about my family history, which I have been researching for the last 40 years. I also love being creative. This account reveals how I combined the two in an embroidery which has touched the hearts of thousands of people. The story spans over 160 years and takes place in a village halfway between the UK cities of Birmingham and Leicester. It begins with my great-grandparents William and Elizabeth, who were born next door to one another in the middle of the Victorian era. At the age of 14, William was apprenticed as a wheelwright for 7 years, and Elizabeth was a nursery maid to the 7 children of the local rectory. Their lives separated for some years, but then crossed again when they were in their mid-20s, and they fell in love. They were married in their parish church in the spring of 1888. A year later, Lillie was born with a mop of curly black hair, followed 19 months later by her sister Elsie, who had the same curly hair, but she was fairer. They lived in a 16th century inn which catered for the travellers of the boot and shoe industry as well as the local community. My eldest aunt told me the stories she had heard from Elizabeth, her grandmother. Visitors of the inn remarked at the girls' childhood delight and kindness. They were the apple of their parents' eyes and a joy to all who met them. William and Elizabeth had a studio portrait of them taken in 1892. When my aunt first saw this portrait as a child, she asked her mother who they were. She was told, "These are your aunts," and then her mother explained the story to her. My aunt died at the age of 96 and had a phenomenal memory. Throughout the decades, I asked her about the stories of my family, and I have written biographies about them to keep their memories alive. William inherited the inn in 1888 when his mother retired. His obituary in the local paper many years later testified to how well thought of they were as a couple by the local community and the visitors passing through. The first years of their marriage with their beautiful daughters were a great joy. In the early autumn of 1894, Lillie started school, and her teacher was delighted with her enthusiasm and eagerness to learn. As children do, she picked up a sore throat which developed into a cough, although it was believed that no serious concern was warranted. It was thought to be a heavy cold, which Elsie inevitably caught too. But then their glands started to swell, and a fever was detected. One of the little girls struggled to breathe, and a mysterious grey film was seen at the back of her throat. Experienced doctors recognised the signs as symptomatic of diphtheria. Diphtheria is highly contagious and is easily spread through contaminated air droplets or transferred through touching something which has been infected. Within a very short space of time, the disease took hold, and the youngest little girl, Elsie, died on the 5th of October 1894. In their devastation, William and Elizabeth were told that the burial had to be as quick as feasibly possible. Elsie was buried 3 days later. Elizabeth's mother stayed with Lillie while they were burying their youngest daughter. But tragically, on their return from the funeral, they found that Lillie had also died. Lillie was buried with her sister in a neighbouring parish, and snowdrops were planted on their graves. The villagers mourned too, and people wondered whether Elizabeth would ever recover from the grief. A year after their deaths, Elizabeth became pregnant again and gave birth to another daughter, Connie, my grandmother. She was a treasured and cosseted child. The disease of diphtheria is caused by a bacteria. If it stays in the nose, the disease can be mild. However, it has the potential to develop poisonous toxins. The grey pseudomembrane, which can develop in the nose and throat, causes blockages to the airways, and the toxin can affect muscles and organs. In the worst cases, it affects the nerves, which can lead to paralysis and death. It was known as the strangling angel of the children. The girls died in the last decade of the Victorian era, when it was not widely known how diphtheria was transmitted. Around the time of the girls' deaths, it was reported in the local paper that due to the high mortality of children in that region from diphtheria, the local parish council were called to a meeting by one of the country's inspectors. During the meeting, it was suggested that sanitary conditions could be a possible cause of the outbreak. A local doctor said, "The sewers are ventilated by manholes in the street, and the water closets and cesspits are only emptied when they are overflowing." The majority of the councillors objected to the inquiry and defensively thought it was the people's duty to give notice when the closets and cesspits were full, not their own. The doctor complained they were not disinfected properly and that the disease was probably spread through the sewer gas as the stench was overwhelming. Many villagers also complained that the manholes were often blocked, and once it rained, all the contents overflowed down the street and directly into people's houses. It was also suggested that milk should be boiled, as the cows could be drinking from contaminated streams. William and Elizabeth had the 1892 studio photograph of Lillie and Elsie enlarged into a framed picture, which graced the wall above their fireplace. In the early part of the Edwardian era, William had 3 properties built in the village, and on his retirement he and Elizabeth moved into one of them. The photograph and a sampler, which Elizabeth had embroidered as a child, were always displayed in their front lounge. Elizabeth died during the Second World War, and Connie took the photograph and sampler into her own home. My mother told me that at some point during the next decade there was a flood, and sadly both the framed picture and sampler were destroyed. When Connie died 40 years later, all her jewellery was distributed amongst her daughters and granddaughters. With my new interest in family history, my mother chose the locket for me, which used to be Elizabeth's. On one side of the open locket was a photo of Lillie and Elsie, which was identical to the one that had been destroyed in the flood. On the other side was a photo of Elizabeth's mother, Matilda. However, when I received it as a teenager, I was a bit disappointed at my mother's choice, because the locket was broken. 10 years later, after graduating as a teacher, I decided to use my first monthly wage to get the locket fixed. I was delighted with the result, and it meant I could now wear the locket. In this photo of William, Elizabeth and Connie, Elizabeth is wearing the locket with the 2 girls visible. The locket itself was only later embellished with the filigree around the outside. With the wonders of technology, I have recently been able to enhance the 17mm photograph that was in the locket into a sharp image of the 2 girls, which you see here. In the spring of 2019, after my health deteriorated, I sadly had to stop teaching. My husband, Chris, wanted to help me and suggested I should have a new sewing machine. It was then that I saw a machine which could both sew and do embroidery. I have always been creative, and the thought of being able to do some embroidery again, even with such limited energy, really excited me. My progress in embroidery has been largely through trial and error, as I did not have the energy to read through manuals. But now, with a lot of love and perseverance, I have been able to do an embroidery of these little girls, which I finished at the end of March 2021. It was during the 1890s that a diphtheria antitoxin was developed by a German physiologist called Emil Adolf Behring. He received the first Nobel Prize in Medicine for the discovery in 1901. The embroidery of Lillie and Elsie is now framed and hanging on our wall. I know Elizabeth and William would be thrilled that their memories live on. It would also not be lost on Elizabeth that it is an embroidery, as she loved doing embroideries herself. This embroidery that she did is the only surviving one that is known. God bless you all for listening. Until next time.